World War II soldiers often faced nights where snow just buried their trenches, rain turned fields into mud, and honestly, bitter winds cut through every layer of clothing they had. With no tents, hardly any supplies, and freezing ground beneath them, survival wasn't just about courage, it was really about creativity. Men turned wreckage into protection, mud into insulation, and canvas into these portable shelters. Every single technique was born out of necessity, tested in conditions that would have totally crushed unprepared civilians. What these soldiers built with their own hands wasn't luxury. It was a lifeline, and the lessons from that time remain strikingly relevant even today. The ingenuity behind each shelter really reflects a critical principle. In the absence of comfort, survival just demands resourcefulness. Even now, understanding these methods gives us insight into human adaptability and some practical solutions that can still inspire modern campers, survivalists, or honestly, anyone who wants to truly respect the environment. Trench covers with corrugated iron and logs. Well, open trenches did provide protection from enemy fire, but they left soldiers totally exposed to the elements. Snow would pile up until trenches were nearly filled, and rain turned them into nothing but muddy traps. Soldiers scavenged corrugated iron from bombed warehouses, old rail cars or barns, and if metal wasn't available, they'd use heavy logs instead. These materials were placed right across the trench tops, forming these pretty crude roofs that were then covered with mud, soil or sandbags to keep them anchored down. The trench transformed from just an open pit into a covered shelter that could block snow, rain, and even, at times, some shrapnel. In those severe winters, like in the Ardennes, even thin corrugated iron, when combined with a layer of mud, kept men from freezing overnight. These covered trenches were low cost, highly effective, and honestly they showcased the principle that shelter can be improvised with whatever materials you have on hand. Sandbag and mud dugouts. For soldiers in areas with those icy winds, shallow trenches were just not enough. They really needed insulated walls that could resist both the cold and the moisture. The solution was actually pretty simple but super effective. Dig deeper into the earth and line the walls with sandbags. To seal up any gaps, mud or clay would be smeared over the sandbags, and once it hardened, it trapped warmth inside and kept the moisture out. These dugouts basically became small underground havens where soldiers could, breathe without shivering and even manage small fires safely. The real genius was in how accessible everything was. Sandbags were standard issue, mud was everywhere, and improvisation was absolutely key. Sure, heavy rains sometimes caused a collapse, but this method really proved that even just simple earth and basic materials could give a functional barrier against nature's harshest conditions. Poncho liantos and shelter halves. When soldiers were on the move, they just didn't have the luxury of constructed dugouts. Rain could soak uniforms in just minutes, and mud would basically eat up boots. Ponchos or shelter halves offered a portable solution. When tied between rifles or trees, these sheets of waterproof canvas could turn into small lean-tos, giving protection for a pair of soldiers. Combining multiple ponchos created larger shelters for groups. Speed was the advantage here. Soldiers could deploy shelter in just a few minutes, and they didn't need any specialized tools. Now, although insulation was pretty minimal, these quick-deploy shelters often made the difference between enduring exposure and succumbing to hypothermia. Snow quinges and foxholes. Snow itself became both a threat and a tool. Packed snow formed natural insulation. Soldiers would dig into snowdrifts or create mounds hollowed into shelters that resembled igloos. The confined space trapped body heat, and even a single candle could increase temperatures enough to survive through the night. Foxholes were adapted in a similar way. Lined with packed snow and reinforced with branches or tarps, they provided protection from wind and precipitation. While these snow shelters were a bit fragile, They really demonstrated the principle of turning environmental challenges into advantages, a lesson that's still totally applicable for modern winter survival. Log-covered bunkers and revetments played a crucial role in survival. You see, shallow trenches often failed under heavy snow, rain, or artillery fire. So soldiers dug deeper and reinforced the roofs with timber, creating these sturdy log-covered bunkers. Covered with soil, snow, or mud, these revetments blended into the environment and provided protection from both weather and observation. Inside these bunkers, body heat was retained, and small stoves or fires could be safely maintained. Now, it's true these bunkers required a good deal of physical labour, but the layered defence of timber plus soil proved remarkably effective. They really highlight the wartime principle: proper layering of available materials can multiply protection against multiple threats simultaneously. Stone and rubble windbreaks were another clever adaptation. Urban battlefields offered rubble, bricks and stones, often discarded or scattered. Soldiers stacked these materials into low walls to create windbreaks. Even waist-high walls, believe it or not, significantly reduced exposure to icy gusts, protected small fires, and allowed soldiers to rest with some relief from the storm. Where stones were abundant, soldiers reinforced the walls with mud or angled doors to provide shelter and runoff. This kind of improvisation honestly illustrates the importance of seeing value in discarded materials and turning them into practical defence against nature. Survival extended beyond warmth and dryness. Soldiers also needed to remain unseen. Camouflage nets, originally intended for equipment, were adapted as overhead shelters. Stretched over foxholes or shallow dugouts and weighted with foliage or mud, they disrupted enemy sightlines while providing additional protection from snow and rain. Properly constructed, these nets allowed soldiers to rest in relative safety while remaining concealed from aircraft and patrols. The lesson endures. Concealment and protection can be combined when materials are repurposed creatively. Raised wooden duckboards and platforms, they were absolutely essential. Mud could be just as lethal as the cold or rain, believe it or not. Trenches would often turn into swamps, and standing in that soaked soil became, both exhausting and really unhealthy. Duckboards, which were basically planks laid across the trench floor, helped raise soldiers above all that muck. Improvised platforms played a big role too, elevating sleeping areas and storage, so personal items stayed dry, and there was less risk of moisture-borne illness. Sometimes even simple branches or crates had to serve as platforms when wood was hard to come by. These solutions weren't perfect, but they really emphasized the principle of separating yourself from environmental hazards whenever you could. The shelters of World War II were never meant to impress. They were crude, improvised, and built in desperation, yet each carried a lesson that really resonates even today. Survival often depended less on comfort and, honestly, more on adaptability. Men transformed timber, mud, snow, stones and canvas into life-saving solutions, proving that ingenuity and resourcefulness outweigh luxury in extreme conditions. Even in modern contexts, these principles, they remain relevant. Understanding how soldiers maximize the utility of scarce materials can actually inform winter camping, emergency preparedness and, survival strategy. It reminds us that ordinary elements, earth, wood and debris, can become extraordinary when applied with knowledge and intent. History holds the methods. Survival belongs to those who learn from them. If you value these insights and want to uncover more hidden survival techniques from history, subscribe now and share this video. Every story recovered strengthens knowledge, resilience, and the ability to endure challenges that today's comforts often make us forget.